of Atlanta, and did you mark the map? Did you place marks on the map?
Yes, I placed 4 marks on the map.
And if we could have number A, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference headquarters and the church are located on Auburn Avenue at the intersection of Jackson and the intersection of Hilliard. Do you admit or deny making that circle there in 1968?
No, I didn't make no circle there. I did make an oblong mark somewhere in that general area.
Your explanation is when you were in Selma and Atlanta that you were never stalking Dr. King. Is that your position?
No, that's my position, yes.
You say that Raul, tell me again, Raul says to you, Eric, I want you to buy a gun. Did he ask you to do that?
He asked me to do that in Atlanta, yes.
You say you had to go to Alabama because you had an Alabama ID, but you didn't use your ID for Galt. You used another alias, Lohmeyer. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yes. I thought it would be better because I had Alabama identification. And in Birmingham, if the sporting goods store wouldn't have sold me the gun without identification, then I could just went somewhere else in the town and displayed my Alabama driver's license and, you know, got purchased the weapons, and that would have been it.
It would be possible, would it not, Mr. Ray, had you wanted to leave Birmingham when you got that rifle at 3 o'clock on the 30th and driven those 150 miles back to Atlanta?
Yes, I could have drove back to Atlanta, yes.
And then where do you say you spent the night of April the 1st?
Corinth, Mississippi.
Now, Mr. Ray, you have seen the Piedmont Laundry ledger, and you've seen the receipts, and you've heard the testimony of Mrs. Peters, which was read here, where it indicates that you were in Atlanta on the morning of April the 1st.
Yes.
And I take it you deny that you were in Atlanta on April the 1st.
Yes, I deny it.
Because you know now, don't you, Mr. Ray, that Dr. King had been in Memphis on the 28th, and there had been this, it broke into a riot, and he came back to Atlanta on the 29th, and there's an article in the Atlanta paper on the 29th about the riot. There's an article in the Atlanta paper on the 30th that he's going to return to Memphis to lead another march, and there's also an article on April 1st about him coming back to Memphis. And so you were not, you're saying you weren't aware of those articles after the 29th. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if I was aware of my, you know, I may have read the paper, but nothing is stuck in my mind about all the riots and things that you've been talking about.
You know how many miles it is from Birmingham, Alabama to Memphis?
No, I don't know the exact mileage, no.
Would you agree that it's about 230 miles if you go the direct route, like Highway 78 or some combination thereof?
It was just a leisure trip to me.
You're taking a leisure trip with a 30-06 rifle going to Memphis for what you say is a gun running deal and what we say is murder. But you're saying it was a leisure trip. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And I want to show you the chart of the inside of the rooming house. You went up the south stairs. You went and saw Mrs. Brewer, said you wanted a room, and then you came around. It's a fact, is it not? She showed you room 8 first, did she not?
She showed me one room. I don't have no firm recollection, but I think she did show me one room first. She said it was a light housekeeping room. And
you looked at that room, and then y'all walked down over here. She showed you that room, and you said you'd take 5B. Is that correct?
Yes, I told her I wanted a sleeping room. That's correct.
Right. This room right here, you can't see anything out of, can you, Mr. Ray?
I don't know what you can see out of it. I never was in it.
Did you look inside of it?
I don't recall. She says I did, and I probably did, but
You could have had room 8 or you could have had room 5B, and you chose room 5B. Is that right?
Yes.
And it was your choice, not Raul's choice. It's your choice.
Yes, there was 2 rooms there, and I picked out that one,
Okay.
yes.
And you had bought a newspaper that morning, April 4th, that has on the front page that Dr. King is at the Lorraine, and your fingerprint was on that newspaper, was it not?
Yes, Bonebreak said it was, and of course I'm sure the paper was mine because it was in the case.
Under further cross-examination, Ray describes traveling to Canada after the murder.
So, Mr. Ray, you flew to London and immediately you turned around and got a ticket for Lisbon, Portugal, did you not?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And it's your testimony throughout that from the time you left Memphis, you had zero help in your travels and your efforts to avoid apprehension.
Yes, after I left the United States, I didn't have any contact with anyone.
Mr. Ray, at the time of your arrest in London, several weeks later, or on June 8th, you had the book on Rhodesia in your possession, did you not?
I think I believe I had a map or something, or some type of travel brochure, yes, sir.
You also had a timetable of South African Airways, did you not?
Yes, I had some. I believe I did have some travel. Yes, some travel schedules. Yes.
The prosecution now confronts Ray with his 1969 admissions concerning the murder.
Mr. Ray, at some point, you've said in this trial that you did not kill Dr. King. That's your testimony, is it not?
Yes, yes.
And in 1969, you initialed and agreed to some 55 stipulations as to material facts which the state would prove in the course of the trial. You agreed with those facts in 1969, did you not?
Well, I did, but this was the result of coercion and misrepresentation.
On March 10, 1969, did you also initial and agree to this stipulation, that at approximately 6:01 p.m. April 4, defendant fired a shot from the second-floor bathroom of the rooming house and fatally wounded Dr. Martin Luther King, who was standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel? You agreed with that stipulation in 1969, did you not?
No, I didn't agree with it. It's a result of coercion and other matters.
And you deny, I take it, that you were in Atlanta on April 1st, like the laundry book shows. Are you denying that?
Yes, I deny that, yes.
And did you, before the House Committee in 1978, when you were asked by Mr. Stokes if there's anything you wanted to change about your statement about being in Atlanta, was this your answer? No, I don't want to change that one regardless of how many documents you have up there. I know I didn't return to Atlanta. If I did, I will just take the responsibility for the King case here on TV.
Yes, I was 100% certain I didn't return to Atlanta, and of course I wouldn't go on TV. Millions of people watch me and, take responsibility for murder, but I knew I wasn't there.
Your Honor, if it please the court, at this time, I think it's agreed that following the completion of the testimony of James Earl Ray, that I be allowed to address the court in respect of the circumstances and details surrounding his admission of certain facts on March 10th, 1969.
Yes.
The conclusion of which the prosecution will be also able to make a short statement. On July 19th, James Earl Ray was transported to the United States from the United Kingdom. He was in a cell block where the lights were on 24 hours a day. There were steel plates over all of the windows, so there was no natural light. There were video cameras on him 24 hours a day, and sound microphones that were available during that entire period as well. So that every sound he made, every move he made, was seen or was recorded. Even his private bodily functions could not be performed without being under the glare of a team of guards who surveilled the monitor and who observed him. He was in these conditions for a period of over 9 months until eventually he had the hearing. One doesn't have to be a psychologist to begin to imagine the impact on a human being of this type of jail conditions and surroundings.
William Pepper now turns to the adequacy of Ray's legal
Judge Battle
representation.
perceived that something was wrong with counsel. And not only had he no intention of trying the case, but he also was physically ill. So what did Judge Battle do? He appointed a local public defender named Hugh Stanton Sr. He had been appointed, this co-counsel of the defendant, he had been appointed counsel for Charles Stevens back in the summer of 1969 by the same Judge Battle. One may attribute it to an overworked public defender system, but the point is, Charles Stevens' affidavit was at the time responsible for James being extradited from the United Kingdom. And it was that testimony that they were going to have to rely on at that time to convict this man. And yet his counsel could not cross-examine him. And why couldn't he cross-examine him? Because he had been his lawyer. And there was no waiver. How outrageous. These plea negotiations went on for 2 months. He knew nothing about them. And he was told he was going to fry if he didn't plead guilty. He was told that a Memphis jury would never acquit him, so he decided he would just throw in his hands as many guilty and sometimes many not guilty people do and give up until he could get out of there and he could file a motion. The judge was reviewing that motion at his desk when he died on I believe it was the 31st of March. In the case of James Earl Ray, a new trial was not granted and has been denied ever since.
Mr. Ray, on March 10, 1969, agreed to certain facts. He agreed that he shot Dr. King. It was set out that the two possible punishments were death by electrocution or life or some period over 20 years, which he signed. Mr. Ray was a very streetwise and court-wise criminal at that point. At that time, the judge asked Mr. Ray a series of questions, including, do you understand your rights to go to trial or to waive trial and plead guilty? And he answered, yes, sir. He was asked if this was what he wanted to do, and he said yes. He was asked whether or not any pressure of any kind by anyone had ever been used on him to get him to plead guilty, and Mr. Ray answered no, no one in any way. He was asked if he was guilty of murder in the first degree, and he said yes, legally yes.
The next defense witness is Barry Linville, a Memphis homicide detective who viewed the death slug taken from Dr. King's body.
I received instructions to go to St. Joseph Hospital and to the UT morgue. While I was at the hospital, they were attempting to find out if there was an exit wound.
And were you present when the body was received at the morgue and in Dr. Francisco's presence?
Yes.
And would you describe what happened at that point?
We examined the wound, and then when we turned the body over, we could see the bullet underneath the skin on the left shoulder.
Mr. Linville, I'd like to show you Defense Exhibit G. Do you recognize that photograph, Mr. Linville?
Yes.
Would you identify that photograph?
That's a photograph of the left shoulder of Martin Luther King, Jr.
And what is this this lump right here?
That's a bullet.
That's the actual, you're stating that that is the actual death slug right there?
Yes.
Were you present when that bullet was removed?
Yes, I was.
And how was that done?
With a scalpel.
And who did that?
Dr. Francisco.
You observed Dr. Francisco remove the bullet,
I did.
the death slug.
Yes.
And what was done with that death slug after it was removed?
We took it to headquarters, tagged it, took it up to Inspector Zachary and Captain Cochran, turned it over to them.
Let me stop you. Who is we? Who took the bullet and tagged it?
Lieutenant J.D. Hamby and myself.
Would you describe this bullet?
Appeared to be a 30-06 caliber. The entire copper jacket was intact, and the end of the bullet was flattened out. The lid, at the end of a 30-06, it's got about, approximately a quarter of an inch of lead, and it was flattened out, but the copper was all intact and showed excellent lens and grooves in it.
How many bullets would you say you have seen in your homicide career?
Thousands.
And in terms of the physical condition of this bullet, how would you rate it?
I'd rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd rate it a 9.
Intact?
Intact.
I'd like to call up on the screen, please, Defense Exhibit G1. Do you see these 3 fragments on the screen?
Yes.
These have been introduced as the death slug in this case. Is this the bullet you saw?
No.
Does it resemble the bullet you saw in any way?
No.
I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you very much.
Are you saying that this bullet was in perfect shape?
Yes.
If you step over here now, if you would. Draw the bullet part perfectly intact.
I'm no artist.
Get pressed down. Okay, now what is this right here you've got?
That's the part that's down here.
Okay, but the bullet, if it's a perfectly intact bullet,
All of this out.
that bullet it looks like a bullet.
Right.
Are you saying what you all saw taken out of Dr. King looked like that?
Yes.
It was perfect in every manner.
Yeah, except right up here.
What do you mean right up here?
The lid part, it's from here, across here, and up, let me see, across here, and on up there, that's lid. And that was flattened. That lid that was up there was flattened, counted to one side.
So you're just saying
It's that lid part was flattened, yes.
that's kind of flattened over like that,
Yes, flattened, yeah.
but otherwise you're saying the bullet looks like a bullet.
Right.
Okay, if you'll have a seat back up there. How much does a bullet weigh?
I have
A 30-06 bullet.
I don't know. My partner, Lieutenant Hamby, was the one that weighed it and measured it and all. I signed the report, but he's the one that did the measurements.
If you would read that second paragraph out loud, Mr. Linville.
The second paragraph,
Yes, sir.
this bullet was approximately 0.30 inches in diameter and weighs approximately 4.7 grams. This is the approximate size and gave appearance of being a 30-06 caliber slug. This slug apparently had a soft nose and is very flattened, but the steel jacket around the base had what appeared to the naked eye to be distinct lines and grooves.
Who else saw those bullets?
Dr. Francisco, Hamby, I don't know the FBI agent's name, Inspector Zachary, Captain Cochran, Earl Williams, Lynn King, I can't remember who all was in the office It was full of FBI agents, I can't tell you. But thought we found a piece of gold when we found it.
Sir?
We felt like we'd found a piece of gold when we found the bullet.
Have you been asked about this over the last 25 years? Is this the first time a week ago that you
This
were
first
asked?
time, a week ago, the first time I've been asked about the bullet.
Ever?
Ever.
Captain, do you recognize this photograph?
I recognize the body. I recognize the bullet that was there as being a photograph that I took at the morgue of Dr. Martin Luther King.
And you point to the, when you pointing to the bullet, are you indicating
Right?
this lump here?
Yes, sir.
Dr. King's back,
That's correct.
by his shoulder blade area. Did you attempt to determine from outside the skin, the structure of that bullet under the skin?
Yes, sir, I did. It was very near the skin, and you could take your finger and pinch and feel and roll that bullet under the skin, or suppose it.
Well, one could do that, but did you do that?
I did.
And what did you feel as you pinched and
I
rolled?
felt a very good bullet and was very thankful that we had a bullet to compare.
And was it in one piece and intact?
What I could feel was in one piece.
William Pepper now asked the captain about the condition of Charlie Stevens, a prosecution witness who linked the fatal shot to the bathroom of the rooming house.
Did you interview and observe one Charles Quitman Stevens, a resident of that rooming house?
I saw him and tried to interview him, but he was too intoxicated to talk intelligently.
Captain Smith, thank you very much. No further questions.
You're saying at 7 or 7:15 when you got up there, you tried to talk to Mr. Stevens, and you said, tell me what you said about Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Stevens was intoxicated to the point he had to lean upon the door to answer questions. He's very incoherent.
Do you think a man that's intoxicated is capable of opening a door and seeing a figure going down a hall?
I'd say he may have done that.
Now, you say you took a picture of Dr. King at the morgue and you felt like, as much as you could feel, that it was a good bullet.
Yes, sir.
Do you think Lieutenant J.D. Hamby is an honorable man?
He was.
And do you think if he recorded, described the bullet and weighed the bullet, that it would be accurate?
I don't know about that, but he was good. He was a good investigator.
The defense calls its own ballistics expert to question the match between the death slug and the .30-06 rifle traced to Ray.
As a part of the technical reports of the House Committee on Assassinations.
Yes, I have.
I show you now, if we can call up on the screen, Defense Exhibit H1. Do you recognize those photographs as being photographs of the three fragments, as you saw them, of the death slug, identified with the FBI number Q64?
That's correct.
Perhaps you'll be kind enough to approach the monitor.
Yes.
And describe for the jury the land and groove impressions and show them where they are.
This is a photograph of the side of the mushroomed base of the bullet. This is the bottom of the bullet. This right here, this narrow strip, is a land impression. This wider mark here is a groove impression. And it's the surfaces of these that bear the markings that are used for characterizing the individuality of a particular bullet. The widths of these, the direction of twist, that is, whether this land is bending to the right or to the left, and the number of these around the circumference are the class characteristics.
Thank you very much. Return.
Thank you.
Would you say the number of Remingtons manufactured with these identical class characteristics would be in the thousands?
I have no specific numbers, but I'm sure it must be in the thousands.
Is it your testimony before this court that it has not been possible to date, with the testing that has been done, to conclude that the rifle, the alleged murder weapon in this case, is the murder weapon to the exclusion of all others?
That's correct.
No further questions.
When a .30-06 bullet is fired, if it hits some part of the body, some bone, could it fragment?
Certainly.
And are these little pieces of lead that we see here, or sometimes they split up and they fragment into the body?
Yes, very typical, especially on a soft-nosed bullet.
And then you've got these little pieces here. How much would you say that would weigh?
Well, I'm at an advantage. I read the report that says it's 64 grains, which is a little bit less than half of the weight.
You're saying a perfect bullet, it's 150 grains, and this weighed 64.4 grains.
Right.
The precise weight of the bullet is important because Officer Linville testified earlier that a whole bullet, not fragments, was removed from Dr. King's body. To suggest a broad conspiracy beyond the capability of Ray, the defense focuses on improper electronic surveillance of Dr. King and questionable security arrangements at the Lorraine Motel.
I was assigned to special services.
And were you trained for this activity, and were you provided with skills around this time?
Yes, sir.
Now, was a part of another scope, an aspect of your training in electronic surveillance?
Yes, sir.
And what was your assignment on the 18th of March?
I was to assist two people that were involved in surveillance.
And who employed the other two people on this team?
They were federal agents.
And where were these surveillance activities to which you were assigned being conducted on the 18th of March?
The Rivermont Hotel.
And were you and the two-man team on the receiving end of those transmissions?
Yes, sir.
And who was the occupant of that suite of rooms on the 18th of March in the Rivermont Hotel?
Dr. King.
Do you know, are you saying these people are from out of town?
Yes, sir. Well, I can't say they were from out of town, but they weren't members of the Memphis Police Department.
I understand that. And did you hear Dr. King's voice?
No.
Did you hear anybody's voice?
No.
And who normally wore those headphones and listened to whatever was going on in Dr. King's suite?
The federal agents.
Were you familiar with the security arrangements that were provided for Dr. King by the homicide division?
Yes, very much so. In 1966, after we had agreed he was coming to Memphis in the June after the day after James Meredith had been shot, when I reached the airport, I had a large station wagon. By that time, we had 3 small sons. And I was met by neatly dressed black men. They introduced themselves as Memphis detectives, that they had been assigned to a special detail. They said to me that whenever Dr. King comes into the city, they would be available. They were assigned to see to it that he was secure in all of his person, and that I could trust them that nothing would ever happen to him while they were on duty.
Reverend Lawson recalls Dr. King's return to Memphis on April 3rd to lead a peaceful march.
That resulted in Dr. King returning to Memphis on the 3rd of April.
Yes, exactly.
Do you recall him ever staying overnight at the Lorraine Motel previously, prior to that occasion?
No, I do not.
Were you familiar with the Lorraine Motel?
No, I was not. I don't know anyone in our entourage was acquainted with the Lorraine Motel. And that's one thing that everybody was so inquisitive about. Where are you taking us? Why the change? what is this Lorraine Motel?
Do you know which room Dr. King was issued initially?
Well, initially, he was issued a room on what, and I think I'm correct now, what we would call the first floor, the same floor that I was finally issued a room. But for some strange reason, his room was changed. That was security there at one point the day we arrived.
But are you talking about the hotel? Around
Yes, sir.
The hotel?
The hotel. That was security. And I don't know who moved the security or why, but I know the security was moved.
Were you, when you were assigned to the field office between 1961 and 71, involved in activities related to or directed against the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Dr. King?
Yes, I was on a squad that was referred to as a security squad. I would say that probably 98% of the time of the people on that squad was involved in one way or another with the investigation of Dr. King or other civil rights people, mainly in the black community. They also were involved in counterintelligence operations which were designed to make up stories about Dr. King, any kind of a story, to denigrate his character, and then go to what the Bureau referred to and the Bureau papers referred to as friendly members of the press. Now, this was done literally thousands of times all over the country to denigrate King.
Were you asked at any time to organize the infiltration of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at its main headquarters in Atlanta, where you were stationed?
Yes, I was. During the period Black Probe was in operation, I recruited about 18 informants. About 9 of them were actually productive.
Mr. Murtaugh, why, during all of those years, did you continue to engage in the types of activities against Dr. King that you described here this morning?
Well, in 1961, when I got to Atlanta, I was very ambivalent about what to do. I knew about a lot of this stuff at least by 1955, and it bothered me. I am a devotee to them.
Take your time.
I'm a devotee to the Constitution of the United States, to the Bill of Rights, and to all the historical documents and policies that were established by our forefathers to keep us free. And when I saw what was going on in the Bureau, I didn't know whether to resign and forget about it or stay in. And my decision was to stay in and comply with everything that the Bureau had a right to ask me to do, and refuse to comply with things that I knew were, as a lawyer, I knew that there were infringements upon the rights of the people that were being targeted. And my brother said, one of my brothers said to me, we had a big family, 8 of us, he said, Art, if things are as bad in the FBI as you say they are, the whole system would crumble. I said, it won't crumble because Hoover has the power to keep it from crumbling. He has everybody scared to death. They do exactly as they tell him. He had everybody in his pocket with his secret files.
Your Honor, let me interrupt here.
Yeah.
We're trying a murder case. The defendant is James Earl Ray. We've allowed certain of this in, but we're getting very far afield here. I understand what the defense is trying to do.
Yeah, I think understanding how strongly you feel, we will ask you to abbreviate this.
Yes, sir.
And have in mind the questions that Mr. Pepper's putting to you and the nature of our case.
Certainly.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Murtaugh, it's no secret now in the whole United States what went on between 1961 and following concerning the FBI and Dr. King, is it? That's
No.
all out in the open now.
That's right.
And you're not here today to say that every agent of the FBI was a racist, are you?
Absolutely not. I would say that a substantial portion of the agents at that time, unfortunately, like the substantial portion of the country, had racial overtones.
In other words, the Bureau agents were a mirror of what the population, what their mindset was back then. Is that about right?
Probably, yes.
You said you recruited 18 black informants and 9 of them were productive.
Yes.
Were you breaking the law when you did that?
No.
But the bottom line is, you're testifying here today in a murder trial
That's right.
of James Earl Ray. You see Mr. Ray over there on the
Yes.
TV? That's what this trial is about. And I will ask you, sir, do you have any evidence that the FBI was part of any plot to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yes, I have a great deal of it.
Do you recall testifying before the House Committee in 1978? The question was asked you. You don't know of any evidence that would lead you to believe that the Bureau was part of the plot to assassinate him. Mr. Murtaugh, I do not. I have never indicated to anybody that I did. You gave that testimony, did you not? Then you were asked, do you have any reason to believe that FBI agents could have been involved in any way in the assassination of Dr. King? And you answered, no reason whatsoever.
I still have no reason whatsoever to believe that they were involved in the killing of King.
And was it your testimony? In fact, they asked you, had you been running the investigation of the murder, what you would have done, and you said, I think that there was enough evidence in my mind to raise some suspicion as to how far the Klan might have been involved. You remember giving that testimony?
Well, at that time, I may have said that, and I think that the Klan could have been involved.
Thank you.
The defense continues its effort to undermine the statement of prosecution witness Charlie Stevens.
Did you talk to any males,
There was Mr. Stevens who was in the kitchen, the same room that I looked out the window to see the bushes.
What condition was Stevens in when you saw him?
He had his head down on the table. He was either sick and I asked him if he knew anything. He was incoherent.
Did you attempt to talk to him any more that evening?
I did not attempt to talk to him that evening. I talked to him the next day.
What was his condition the next day?
He seemed to have been maybe recovering from a drunken bout.
Now, on April 4, 1968, you were driving a cab. And did you receive a call to pick a passenger up at 422.5 South Main Street? I sure did, old Charlie Stevens. What time of day did you receive this assignment? It was after 5:45. When you went up the stairway to approach Mr. Stevens' room, did you notice the bathroom? Yeah, it was right next to his room. Was the bathroom door open or closed? It was standing wide open. Was there anyone in the bathroom? No. Did you knock on Charlie Stevens' door? I knocked on the door and somebody said, come in. I opened the door and they was laying on the bed, too drunk to get up. So how many minutes would it have been in your view from the time that you actually left the rooming house until you heard the bulletin? About 4 minutes.
Returning to its conspiracy theme, the defense calls 2 black firemen and a black police officer who were removed from the vicinity of the Lorraine Motel before the shooting.
And back in April of 1968, Chief Wallace, where were you assigned?
Number 2's engine house on South Main.
And was there another black fireman also assigned to that station?
Floyd Newsom.
And did you receive any instructions or orders on the evening of April 3rd?
I was detailed to another engine house, number 33's, which is located out at the airport.
And was a reason given to you for that detailing?
No.
Was the engine house out at the airport undermanned?
No. No.
Well, goodness, why were you sent there?
That's the same question I asked.
And what was the response to you?
He said, well, we're moving you because you've been threatened.
Oh, you were threatened?
Yeah.
I see. Who threatened you?
I don't know.
Were you aware that Mr. Richmond and Mr. Reddit had a communication down to their superiors that they were concerned about the 2 black firemen down there, you and Mr. Newsom, that y'all were not comfortable with them being there and they weren't comfortable with y'all being there? No. You aware of that?
No.
Mr. Newsom, did you play any active role in the affairs of the Memphis community during the time of the sanitation workers' strike?
Yes, sir, I did.
During this period of time, how many other black firemen were assigned to engine house number 2?
1 other than me.
And who was that other fireman?
It was N.E. Wallace.
On April 4th, the day of the assassination, were you to have worked? Were you scheduled to be on?
Yes, sir.
You were. Were you aware at the time you were working in the fire station of the surveillance activity that was being conducted from the rear of the engine house directed over toward the Lorraine Motel?
Yes, sir.
How many police officers did you observe being assigned to that surveillance activity?
Well, I really can't tell you in number. I do know that there were, best of my knowledge, there were 2 blacks.
Did you go to work at engine house number 2 on the 4th of April?
No, sir. Because when I arrived home on the night of April the 3rd, a message was there for me to call my lieutenant, who was Lieutenant Jack Smith. When I called him, he informed me that I was not to report to my regular assignment the next day. Instead, I was to go to the number 31s, which is out in Fraser.
So on the 4th of April, 1968, the day Martin Luther King was assassinated, you were transferred to this other fire station, and you reported there.
Yes, sir.
Were you needed there?
No, sir. Once I was detailed from that particular company, it was short. The company that I was detailed to, I made an extra person.
Were you ever detailed after that time in such a fashion?
No, sir.
And it was not explained to you to your satisfaction?
It wasn't explained, period. I raised the question again of Deputy Chief J.O. Barnett, if he could now tell me why I was moved, and he said that it was by orders of the police department.
Do you know an police officer by the name of E. Reddick?
Yes.
Well, would you be surprised to know that Detective Reddick has given a memo to the entire world that he asked you to be removed from the fire station because you were giving them a problem, you were hassling them, and indicated that you were going to reveal their location to the people across the street, whether they were strikers or Dr. King's party?
No, I don't know anything about that.
That's all, Judge.
And from what vantage point did you conduct that surveillance on the Lorraine Motel?
From the fire department, which was
on Main Street. In the back of it faced Lorraine Hotel.
Did you have any difficulty with any of the firemen, particularly the black firemen who were assigned to engine house number 2?
Well, not really. Only one of them didn't like the presence of our being there.
But in fact, did you request the transfer of either of those black firemen?
No, other than in our report we stated that one of the firemen did not like our presence there.
In the course of your duties on April 4th, the day of the assassination, did you complete your regular work day?
No. A man by the name of Lieutenant Orkin came to the firehouse and stated I was wanting it at the headquarters. We drove back to headquarters, parked, went inside to the director's conference room. Once entering, there was a man standing at the door, had just arrived from Washington, who was a Secret Service person, stating that there was a contract on my life. At this, the director said, "You were going home anyway." And we proceeded out the door to my home.
After Dr. King was killed, what happened to this threat on your life?
Well, Thursday passed, Friday passed, Saturday passed, Sunday they said come back to work.
So the threat disappeared?
Disappeared.
After Dr. King was killed?
Right.
Detective Reddit, thank you very much. No further questions.
Do you recall that you and Officer Richmond went to the airport on April the 3rd?
Yes.
When Dr. King arrived in town?
Yes. The only thing I remember is someone in the crowd said, "We don't need you for security." My minister had told me that to be careful of myself because people were saying that I was carrying messages back and forth, which he knew was untrue.
So you were accused by people at the church of being a spy, basically?
Yeah, basically.
What about telephone calls to the fire station while you were there?
I received a call on the morning of the 4th stating that we're going to kill you.
You recall testifying before the House subcommittee in this matter back in 1977? Inspector Times had testified before this committee, and he has testified under oath to the fact that you had a concern about one of 2 black firemen in the fire station, number 2, because you knew they were involved in militant activities and sympathetic to the strikers, and you felt that they would be a problem with respect to yours and Richmond's observation post. And pursuant to that communication, Inspector Times then called someone in the Memphis Fire Department and stated the problem, and thereafter, as we know, the firemen were transferred. Do you recall talking to Inspector Times about this? In your answer, Mr. Reddick, I remember writing it.
The defense argues that the death shot came not from the bathroom of the rooming house, but from a brush-strewn vacant lot between the rooming house and the Lorraine Motel, which was ordered cleared on the morning after the murder.
After the shot, we ducked down, and the first thing I saw was Dr. King's leg dangling over the balcony. When I saw the leg, that's when I looked back and saw the smoke. It couldn't have been more than 5 to 10 seconds. The smoke came up out of the brush area on the opposite side of the street from the Lorraine Motel. I saw it rise up from the bushes over there. I also noticed quite early the next morning, around 8 or 9 o'clock, that all of the bushes and brush on the hill were cut down and cleaned up. It was as though the entire area of the bushes from behind the rooming house had been cleared. I will always remember the puff of white smoke and the cut brush, and having never been given a satisfactory explanation. When I tried to tell the police at the scene as best I saw, they told me to be quiet and get out of the way. I was never interviewed or asked what I saw, by any law enforcement authority in all of the time since 1968. Would you describe for the court your movements on April 4th, 1968?
Yes, sir. We were on routine patrol in the downtown area and also the perimeter of the downtown area. I went up to the rear of the building, hotel, which is located across the street from the Lorraine Motel.
What did you, how would you describe that rear backyard area of that rooming house?
Growed up quite a bit with large hedge-type bushes and weeds.
And did you find any evidence?
Yes, sir. On the south side of the building, I did locate what appeared to be a fresh footprint.
Where was this footprint?
It was right, it would be on the southeast corner of the building, approximately 7 or 8 feet, I would think, from the corner of the building.
And what did you do when you saw this, as you've described it, apparently freshly made footprint?
I advised one of the homicide officers on the scene that what I had found, and he told me to secure it until they could get a team over there to make a cast of it.
Your Honor, the defense would like to call up on the screen Exhibit O, which is a photograph taken of evidence in the clerk's office, being 2 footprints, apparently 2 footprints.
While you all were there, could you tell if that print had been there for 1 minute or 10 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes?
No, sir, I could not due to the condition of the ground. I couldn't
No,
say.
there's no way of telling how long that print had been there.
No, sir.
And did you have the occasion on the following day, April 5th, to send out a cleanup team to the crime scene area behind the rooming house on South Main Street?
I received a telephone call from a representative of the police department, and the request was to assist the police in cleaning that lot in looking for evidence. Our people would have followed the direction given by the police as to speed, as to what they cleaned, etc.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
You're saying the police wanted to go out there and they wanted some of this cleared off so they could look on the ground and within the debris to see if they could find additional evidence. Is that what you're saying?
They told me they were looking for evidence.
Did you have a telephone conversation with Mayor Ingram on the morning of April 5th?
Yes.
And as a result of that conversation, did you go over to the South Main Street area?
Yes.
And where did you go there, and what did you observe at the South Main Street area?
The trees which line the embankment behind the rooming house and which would have overlooked the Lorraine Motel had been cut and the area had been cleared and cleaned.
Now, you received this call on the morning of April 5th.
Right. I remember City Hall reporter had gotten a statement from City Hall saying the sanitation crew had cleaned it up to make it look better for all the people coming into town.
Back in April of 1968, for which paper were you writing then?
I was writing for the New York Times.
You were a New York Times reporter.
Yes.
And were you given an assignment to Memphis, Tennessee in April of 68?
Yes, I was.
And what was your assignment?
Well, at that time, Claude Sitton was the national editor of the paper, and I was working as a national correspondent, and I was told to go to Memphis, Tennessee, and we had a meeting And at this meeting, he told me that he had gotten information that Dr. King now had people as a part that were a part of his group that he couldn't control. He said he could no longer control his people. And he explained some of that to me, and I remember the last words where he wanted me to go to Memphis and nail Dr. King.
Okay, now we're on the last hour of Dr. King's life.
Right.
And at 6 o'clock, at 6 p.m., where are you standing and what are you doing?
At that moment, I heard what I was sure was a bomb blast. I ran into the doorway to see what happened because I was sure the motel had been bombed. As it happened, the first thing I saw when I looked out the door was a figure in the bushes directly, I would say, directly across to the right of where I was looking when I looked out.
And what was that figure doing?
Well, I couldn't tell. He was doing something in the bushes. I didn't know what he was doing. At that moment, it was like he was the key to what had happened in my mind.
Has any FBI agent ever asked you what you saw?
No. No one asked me ever. No FBI agents, no local police, no authorities at all.
How did you know to go to the Lorraine Motel?
Because I had called ahead to Memphis, to the SCLC headquarters, telling them who I was. I wanted to know where he was staying, and I was going to stay at the same motel.
Then would you talk to them on the 1st or the 31st?
Yes, I talked to all those days.
And you found out from them
yes,
that they were going to stay at the Lorraine when they came to Memphis?
Yes.
Would you come over here and approach the chart?
Right.
Point to where you say you were staying at the hotel or motel.
I think my room would have been about like right in here or something like that.
So you come to the door when you hear the bomb blast, and you're standing there in your shorts,
right?
And you look, and
right.
Where do you say this man was in the bushes?
He was right here in the heavy part of the bushes. These bushes, mind you, I say bushes. They were pretty high. They were really high. They were like, they weren't bushes. You say bushes that were like knee high. They're much higher than that.
Could you stand right over here so everybody can see you? Would you describe what you saw the man do? I mean, in other words, get down there and let's go through what you say you saw out there.
Well, okay. Mind you, there are these bushes there. And when I'm seeing this guy for the first time, he's in some kind of a position, but I can't tell whether he's like this or whether he's like this or whether he's like this. I really don't know. But he was out of some kind of a position that was not a stand-up position.
Okay, and you see him with a gun?
No.
So when you see him and he's in the bushes, is he twisting toward this way or is he twisting this way?
No, when I see him at first, he was looking at something
over
towards the motel. Yes,
okay.
Right. Uh-huh.
Did he look up when he twisted?
He was still looking over to the balcony.
Was this man white or black?
He was white.
What was he wearing?
I don't know. I thought it was some kind of a coveralls or something. I said in my notes, I said I thought he was in coveralls or something like that. I couldn't really be sure.
Over the years, up until recently, were you aware the House Committee looked into this?
Yes, I was.
And did you offer to tell them what you saw?
I didn't think it was my place to offer to them, but I did write in the newspaper and saw to it was published what I knew and why I knew it.
Thank you.
Your Honor, that being the last witness available to the defense rests.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now coming to the critical final stages of this trial. The prosecution, which has the burden of proof, has the right to make an opening argument. Then you'll hear the defense argument. Then you will hear whatever rebuttal the prosecution is entitled to make because it does have the burden of proof.
The reason why we are here today is because back on April the 4th, 1968, at about 7 o'clock p.m., a wife and a mother received a telephone call. A call that we would all dread to receive, which caused her to huddle her 4 children together and say, "Daddy is not coming home tonight. Daddy is not coming home again." That's why we're here. The judge is not going to tell you we got to prove or disprove whether the bushes rattled, whether something was in the bushes, man or beast, but was there any significant proof that a shot was fired from the bushes? Let's move to some testimony in this case, and a lot of time was spent on Mr. Charles Stevens. Charlie Stevens, the tenant in the boarding house. Whether he was intoxicated or not. I submit to you, if a person fires a .30-06 rifle in a room right next to yours, that you're going to hear it. Whether you are sober, slightly intoxicated, or intoxicated. A shot that loud in a room like this would wake up the dead. One witness described it as a bomb blast. And he is away across the street. Charlie is right next door. And of course, we heard about Raoul. Raoul, the man who can appear and disappear at will. You know why? Because he's a figment of James Earl Ray's imagination. He exists only in the darkest recesses of his mind. Of course, Dr. Pepper will say, "Poor James, poor James, poor James." Well, quite frankly, he ought to count his blessings, because some people still believe in an eye for an eye. On behalf of the state of Tennessee, we thank you. We ask you to return the proper and appropriate verdict in this case, and that's guilty. Guilty of murder, because that's what he did. Thank you.
Why did James Earl Ray flee? Because he knew he was guilty. The question in this case was Mr. Pepper's last question to James Earl Ray. Did you fire and shoot and murder Dr. King? Answer, no, I didn't. That's the whole case right there. Is he a liar or is he a truth teller? He's a liar. He'd rather climb a tree and tell a lie than stand on the ground and tell the truth. That's the kind of man James Earl Ray is. 11 days before Dr. King got to Los Angeles, James Earl Ray has plastic surgery to change his features. James Earl Ray, I submit, at that point knows that he's getting ready to do Dr. King in, or try to do him in. I don't know if he tried in Los Angeles, but I do know this. Dr. King's there on the 16th and 17th, and on the 17th, James Earl Ray puts in a change of address from Los Angeles, California, to Dr. King's hometown, Atlanta, Georgia. The next time anybody can prove he's anywhere, he's in Selma, Alabama, on March 22nd, where Dr. King was scheduled to be on the 21st, and then he was going to drive over to Georgia on the 22nd. That's the published schedule as of the time James Earl Ray left Los Angeles. James Earl Ray, I submit, is looking for Dr. King. We know this. On March 24th, he's in Atlanta. On April 15th, they found that map in the place where he lived. and we all saw the circles. The circles are right out there by Dr. King's house. The circle is down there near where the church and the headquarters of the SCLC is. That's where those are. Is it a coincidence that the man that's across the street from the Lorraine, whose fingerprints are on the rifle, that he has circled Dr. King, where Dr. King lives? James Earl Ray is in Memphis all day, pretty much all day the day before the murder. Dr. King spoke that night, and it was storming. I've been to the mountaintop, and I may not get to the other side. And James Earl Ray is out at the Rebel Motel with that rifle. He says, I gave the rifle to my friend Raoul. And he would have you to believe he's not involved in the murder. He just gave it to somebody else, and somebody else must have murdered Dr. King. The only way you can find him not guilty in this case is to find that he didn't shoot and he didn't knowingly participate. You heard the FBI investigation. Unbelievable, the things they went through to catch James Earl Ray. I want to tell you something. If there's any evidence that the FBI is involved in Dr. King's murder, Mr. Murtaugh would have coughed it up. Mr. Pepper is going to talk about the defense, but I'm going to say a couple of words about it before I sit down. If you don't have the facts, you argue the law. If you don't have the law, you argue the facts. If you don't have either one of them in a case, you attack the government. And that's what happened here. Ladies and gentlemen, James Earl Ray is a killer. James Earl Ray is a liar. And I agree with my colleague. The only appropriate verdict in this case is guilty. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The burden is on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And the state's case is basically a case, as they've admitted, of circumstantial evidence. Let me move on for a moment this discussion about James Earl Ray, because he's not a murderer. He's never been involved, never any hint of any crime of violence. James was, so the prosecution says, involved in the act of stalking Dr. King. He stalked him. Well, I think that's really absurd in light of the facts. Dr. King came to Los Angeles from Detroit the weekend of March 17th. James left Los Angeles on March 17th. Dr. King arrives, James Earl Ray leaves. That's an example of stalking. Hardly think so. James had a habit of circling maps when he went into towns and cities. He would draw little circles around them. But it's misrepresentation to say that those circles on the Atlanta map, as we all saw here, and as the evidence reflects, were around Dr. King's house. I mean, around. That means the house inside, or around the SDLC headquarters. Because they weren't. They didn't enclose them. James Earl Ray is not a racist. There's no indication that he hates black people, that he's had difficulty with them. But I don't believe the state has shown a shred of evidence of any motive whatsoever. Now, I think we should put aside the heat for a couple of moments, and I think we should really look at the state's case. They have a weapon that was found in a bundle of evidence thrown down beside Knipe's amusement parlor, and they tried their best to match that weapon to the death slug. And they were unable to do so. The fact is that that's a throwdown gun that James was instructed to buy in Birmingham, Alabama, and turn over so that, in fact, it could be thrown down, so that it could be left behind. You note in their summation the prosecution didn't mention Detective Barry Neal Linville. You recall he was the detective who took the bullet, tagged it, and off it went to Washington to the FBI. You've heard the description of of that bullet as being a single slug, intact single slug. When Linville saw this, he was amazed. He couldn't hardly contain himself. He said, "That's not the bullet. That's not the bullet. That's not the slug. That's not what I saw." Now, the prosecution maintains that the shot came from a bathroom, the bathroom in the rooming house. There are no fingerprints anywhere in the bathroom. We also know that when a taxi cab driver went up to pick Charlie Stevens up shortly before 6 that afternoon to take him, because there was a call for him to come, James McCraw, that Mr. McCraw saw the bathroom door open. This is just before 6, and no one in it. And when he saw Mr. Stevens, he was so drunk, he decided not to take him. No, ladies and gentlemen, the shot the defense suggests, and the proof and the evidence indicates, did not come from the bathroom. The shot came from the brush, from the bushes down below, from the backyard. That's where the murderer lay in wait for Dr. King. The Reverend James Orange testified in a sworn statement that he saw a puff of smoke rising from the same brush area after the shot. And then we had journalist Earl Caldwell. He saw a man crouching in the brush area and rising. Now, that's where the shot came from. That's where the evidence indicates the shot came from, not the bathroom. If there is no significance to the brush in the back of the rooming house, why was it cut? To assist the police to find evidence? No. The defense suggests the brush was cut so that it could never be suggested that there was enough brush there to conceal a sniper. And there was. James Earl Ray arranged this. James Earl Ray caused all this to happen. Could James Earl Ray cause the scene of a crime to be tampered with in this way? An FBI agent on the stand here, Agent Hester, he said 3 times, and finally he said categorically, the FBI did not have any electronic surveillance on Dr. King when he was in Memphis, Tennessee. You heard the testimony of a witness who was one of a 3-man team who, in fact, carried out that surveillance. Reverend Hosea Williams, who was one of Dr. King's closest aides, testified for the defense that Martin's hotel room and the hotel itself, the reservations itself, were changed. He was to have been in the ground floor room instead, where there would have been more security and protection for him. Instead, he was moved upstairs. Could James Earl Ray arrange this? Could James Earl Ray do this? And then there was the removal of firemen Newsom and Wallace and Detective Reddit. James Earl Ray has been incarcerated for 24 years. To find him guilty is to perpetuate that incarceration. To find him not guilty as required by the evidence in this case will make all the difference and will right a wrong that has existed for a good portion of all of our lives, the lives of each and every one of us. Thank you very much.
All I can do at this point is respond to Mr. Pepper. He says, let's get this case in an air of civility and serenity. You think the killer gave Dr. Martin Luther King any civility that night? No hint of any crime of violence from James Earl Ray. He's not a marksman. Oh, yeah? He agreed that you qualify with a rifle in the Army at 100 yards, at 200 yards and 500 yards. In this case, it was a 205-foot shot from the window with a scope that can magnify up to 7 times. Ballistics, we never contended. We have never contended that there's a positive identification. This thing with Mr. Linville is kind of amazing, but you remember we had to draw the thing up there, and I was thinking, good night, where did that come from? Because we had read Mr. Hamby's affidavit, and of course Mr. Linville acknowledges Mr. Hamby is the guy that took custody of the bullet. Fortunately, Mr. Hamby wrote down how much the slug weighed, or what was left of it, 4.7 grams. And so I had to ask the expert, am I dreaming? What's going on here? Mr. Morton, the next witness after Linville, how much does a 30-06 slug weigh? 9.7 grams. I don't know why Mr. Linville said what he said. He's mistaken. Why was the brush cut? The man that was in charge of cutting it said to assist the police to find evidence. If the bushes are that thick, let's get down there and look on the ground. Maybe somebody was out there. Didn't find anything. You know, when I was little, when my tooth fell out, my mama told me that you put the tooth under your pillow and the tooth fairy will bring you $1 or 50 cents or whatever it was. She also told me that there was a Santa Claus. But as I grew up and could think for myself, I learned that there ain't no tooth fairy, and there ain't no Santa Claus, and there ain't no Raoul in this case. It's fantasy. That night, James Earl Ray had a rifle. That's the truth. And justice demands a verdict of guilty in this case. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've now heard the evidence in this case. It is my duty now to read you your instructions on the law that governs this case and will govern your deliberations. You, the jury, are the sole and sovereign judges of the facts. I come now to the specific charge in this case of first-degree murder. Before you may find the defendant guilty of this charge, you must be satisfied that the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt each and every one of 5 essential elements. First, that the defendant unlawfully killed Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Second, that the killing was malicious. Third, that the killing was willful. Fourth, that the killing was deliberate. Fifth, that the killing was premeditated. A person may be found guilty of a crime if the person is shown beyond a reasonable doubt to have acted as an aider and abettor in the language of the law. You will understand, of course, that mere presence at the scene of a crime does not make a person an aider and abettor. There must be evidence that the person knowingly participated in the commission of the crime. Reasonable doubt is the kind of doubt that exists if, after examining all the evidence in the case, you find your minds unable to rest easily upon the certainty of guilt. Reasonable doubt does not mean absolute certainty or doubt beyond mere speculation. If absolute certainty were required, then no one could ever be convicted of a crime. Now, under the governing law of Tennessee, if the evidence is found to be entirely circumstantial, before you may find the defendant guilty, you are required to find that all the essential facts are consistent with the hypothesis of guilt. The verdict in this case may take one of 2 forms. It may say, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. Or it may say, we the jury find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, as charged in the indictment. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes your instructions in this case. The jurors may now retire and proceed to commence their deliberations. Sergeant?
The jury is retiring now to consider its verdict after hearing more than 50 hours of testimony over a 10-day period. If the jury has a reasonable doubt, they must find Ray not guilty of the murder of Dr. King. But on instructions from the judge, the jury must find Ray guilty of murder in the first degree if they find beyond a reasonable doubt that he pulled the trigger or he knowingly participated in the commission of the crime. We will hear the verdict shortly. The program you have seen tonight has been edited for television with the cooperation and approval of both attorneys. They believe it represents a fair and balanced presentation of the evidence. Although the verdict you are about to hear will carry no legal weight, James Earl Ray, after 25 years, has had his day in court.
Mr. Foreman, is the verdict written on this jacket the unanimous verdict of the jury?
Yes, sir.
The jury, collectively and individually, has confirmed that the verdict on this jacket is the verdict of the jury. And the verdict reported is, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
And so the trial of James Earl Ray comes to an end. There have been no actors, no scripts tonight. You have seen real witnesses, real lawyers, and heard the considered opinion of 12 citizens who have served as jurors. It's impossible to predict what impact their verdict will have on the future for James Earl Ray. But we hope that this program has added to the body of knowledge about this historic case and helped the many efforts to determine the guilt or innocence of James Earl Ray. For HBO, I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault.